Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, as we develop our positive Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, we also must develop our psychological assessment, the methodology of psychological assessment, and there are many approaches. So I'm going to give you a short summary, and then on the later video I will explain to you how to have this psychological assessment based on SEMP integration. That means the spiritual element must be there. You must have the physical element, which is normally you have there. You have the mental element, which normally you have in any psychological handbook. But the mind element is something new. Alright, there's a lot of research on the mind element. Then the element of the heart-mind connection, that is the qalb, not much is covered. And then at the spiritual level, this is something very new. So if you go to every book of psychological assessment, there are many handbooks on psychological assessment. This is one typical example, which I'm just going to read to you. Alright, so first, for psychological assessment, you must have the context of the clinical assessment. So what are the contexts? So you have type of referral settings, ethical practice of assessment, assessing diverse groups, selecting psychological tests, what kind of tests you want to give, computer assisted assessment, and recommended reading. Okay, then you have assessment interview. How are you going to do this assessment interview? Alright, history and development, related issue to reliability and validity, assets and limitation, assessment interview and case history, mental status examination, interpreting interview data, structured interviews, etc. Then you have the next one. You have behavioral assessment, history and development of behavioral assessment, issues related to reliability and validity, assessment and limitation, strategies of behavior assessment, and so on. Then after that, you have the many various tests. But now there are so many hundreds of tests. You have the Wechsler Intelligence Scale Test. You have the Wechsler Memory Scale Test. You have the Minnesota Multi-Phase Sick Personality Inventory. You have the Million Clinical Multi-Action Inventory. You have the California Psychological Inventory. You have the Rorschach Test. Okay, this ink block test. All right. Then you have thematic appreciation test. Then you have screening for psychological impairment, and then many other tests. So when we're talking about testing in terms of clinical assessment, there are so many hundreds of tests now, and a lot of these tests are online. Especially you have national organizations. For example, you have national organization or NGO, for example, with regards to bipolar, with regards to autism, with regards to schizophrenia, with regards so many. So they themselves have created a lot of many online tests. So you need not depend on these tests that I have mentioned to you. No doubt, if you are a professional counselor, you are getting clients who are insurance based, for example, then naturally they want certain tests that they have specified. Each insurance company, they have the range of tests, and you must be certified, qualified in that specific test. But generally, as a approach for our Islamic positive Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, we have to rely on these tests for the time being, because again, the whole work of assessment methodology, you see, this is just one book. There are plenty of books like that in the world talking about assessment. But again, the assessment is limited to the biological, psychological frame of assessment. That's why we have to develop a research base where we have this, I keep on actually mentioning, SEMP integration, spiritual, emotional, mental and physical integration, even into our assessment. Because how are you going to assess? Because if you don't take the emotional element that relates to the heart, as well as the spiritual element that relates to the spiritual practices and our connection with Allah or with God. So what is important is we just have a framework. I'm going to give you a certain framework to work on, and then I will add on the Islamic elements or the spiritual elements, the cult element, and then this could be a basis for your research. As I'm saying, this is not something that can be done immediately. It may take 10 years of our own Islamic group of cognitive behavior therapies, positive Islamic psychology research center to do this. Okay, and then come up with an equivalent test that is very valid and it can be spread over the whole spectrum within the psychological problems that Ummah is facing as well as humanity in general. So if we go to this purpose of assessment, first we have to understand the person. And that's why in the first R we are talking about is the realization. You must realize first who you are as a counselor, as a therapist, as a life coach. So if we are tackling at this first level, our approach in positive Islamic psychology, cognitive behavior therapy approach is basically we are talking about life coach first. We are not going to go to heavy duty certified counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist and so on, because those levels are much more require licensing and all kind of other legal requirement. So we are at this level, maybe for the next 5 years, we are talking about life coach training for community development, and the 4 areas which I have mentioned in the certified life coach program, you can open. There are 4 areas in which you can specialize in terms of being life coach. That is good for community development, mosque development, health, mental health assistance at mosques, community centers and so on. So we have to understand the person, then through the various tests we have to predict the behavior, then we plan the treatment, then evaluate the outcome, treatment outcome. So this is the flow, which is quite easily understood. And at this level, we would then be able to do all the kind of tests. As I mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of tests now where you can do online and the result is within 1 or 2 minutes. You can get the result almost immediately, so there's no problem. But you don't want to do online, then you can have those various other tests which I have shown you in my previous video. But you can use those tests, and then you can use that assessment of the test as a basis of a Q&A in terms of your assessment, in terms of clinical assessment. So the whole idea is when you do about this clinical assessment, you must, like a funnel. The funnel is very broad, then you come down to what is particularly the problem of that individual of your client. So you start broad, and then you must have multidimensional approach. So now they are understanding there must be multidimensional, not only in terms of biological, not only into psychopharmacy, not only in terms of CBT, but we have to bring this multidimensional means we have to approach the human being at the 4 levels: the physical, the mental, mind, the emotional, the heart, and the roh, the cup. So we have this multinational approach. Now most people are talking about multinational because you cannot have one approach to tackle, for example, bipolar. So many of these problems, in fact, for example, they use a drug-based, modern psychopharmacy to use it. The side effects so severe, and people are not getting better, and more people are having very severe bipolar problems throughout the world, and they are becoming non-functional human beings, which is a loss to society. So that's why it's important for us to understand this multidimensional approach and then narrow to a specific problem area. So if we are good in this area, then we can narrow to this very specific problem area, and inshallah from there we can start the counseling or the life coach of the individual so that they can overcome their problem in a group setting. Again, for community development, mosque development, and Islamic welfare services for mental health and so on, you always try to do group. Because if you have only one certified clinical psychologist, only one, how can he or she handle? So you have to have the support of the group who are trained in terms of Pi-CBT. That's why ours is more like a da'wah. But da'wah, insofar as developing a way forward for the ummah to understand how you're going to tackle the very severe mental health problems within the ummah and move away from the very basic approach that everything is in the Quran, everything is in the Hadith, you just follow the Quran and the Hadith, you solve all your problems. That is not the way of the great scholars of Islam. The great scholars of Islam always use research, and there's so much research in psychology now, so much research in terms of brain sciences, so much research in terms of natural molecules, herbal molecules that can affect the brain and give very positive result. For example, like CBD, cannabinoid, or TLC, and so on. So there are many areas in which there's a lot of work which we can contribute to the development of the ummah and humanity. So what are the domain assessment? So we have the clinical interview, all right? If we have time, we'll go into this one very specific toolkit. Most common what are the most common clinical assessment method? Whether it's structured or semi-structured. You want to be structured? There's a lot of forms. You can go to a few websites. There are a lot of websites, for example, like Psychology tools.org, you can pay a subscription and you can have access to all their format, their material, including their test system. So there are 4 or 5 organizations that charge a very minimum amount. Just be a subscriber, subscribe to their website, all right, and then you pay a small amount to get the full range of services. You can get a lot of free material, no FOC, but then if you want to have more material, as a life coach, it is good. You pay maybe $10 a year or something like that, and then you can have access to all the materials that they have developed over the last 20 years. Okay? So then you have this mental status examination in terms of appearance, behavior, and behavior thought processes, mood and affect, intellectual functioning, sensorium. What are the sensory perception that is within the body, whether it's catatonic and so on. And then you have the physical examination. So you can see from here, you have the physical ring, you have the mental ring. You don't have the mind. Alright? You don't have the role. So as we develop further, I'm going to give you more and more of this understanding. So this is the first toolkit in terms of clinical assessment, and we'll maybe have other videos as a subsequent to this, so that we can give you a basis for us as Muslims to develop our own psychological assessment methodology that is valid, that is good for the development of mental health of the Ummah in the 21st century, inshallah.